Bass for me is one of the most important elements in a track, and when you've got an instrumental like what you're hearing right now, there's just so many ways you could go about laying down a bass line. It can be overwhelming, but today I want to demystify the art, and that goes from sound selection to what you're actually going to play, to a couple of mixing tips and some psychology stuff as well, because you know that we love to get into that. But so you're standing at crossroads and you're like, where am I going to go? And as in everything, simplicity tends to be my favourite answer to the question. But it's always fun to flex a little bit as well. And you're going to learn how to do this today. You're also going to learn how to do this. And if you want to call it level 3, you're going to learn how to do this as well. So let's get into it. Our journey starts with the humble sawtooth bass. First of all, what is a sawtooth bass? Well, sawtooth is just a type of oscillator. So it's a sound you've definitely heard before because it is just so common. It's that kind of low end Drake kind of bass it became known as, I guess. You can use it in several ways. I like to use a sound in Omnisphere called the growler Moog bass, but you can make these sounds really easily, and I've shown you how actually in one of my previous videos. Hit me up on IG and I'll send you a link to that if you want. Essentially, it's just a very, very simple sawtooth wave, and you can add a bit of unison, you know, to spice it up a little bit, and then filter it down a little bit as well, just so that some of the top end comes out and it sounds a little more low end. The reason it's so good is that, again, it translates really well on small speakers, fills up a lot of space, so you don't really need too many other sounds around it to get a full sounding track. But there are some interesting ways you can use it and some rules and things like that I want to show you. Look at this. This is a very simple bass line for my progression, and my progression is just in C major or A minor. We're just going from a 2 3 4 ascending, then we're going descending to a 4 3 2. That would be like a D, E and an F. So essentially I've just programmed what we call root notes here, which is a D, an E and an F. Check this out. Sounds cool, right? And we could stop there, to be honest. Right, tutorial done. No, I'm only joking. Now the first thing, and I'm going to show you a couple of tricks with this first bass line here to just make it a little bit more interesting, and then we'll move on to the next kind of way we can use that sawtooth descending that I like to do, like a few more techniques. So the way this is going to work is it's going to be simple and gradually get more complicated as we go, but you'll be able to follow it, I promise you. And if you want to go deeper than this, hit me up on IG for a 1-to-1. I'm offering those now. And yeah, go cop a free mini kit if you haven't already. The link is in the description. Do that, like and subscribe and all that jazz. At the moment we've just got like 2 1-bar notes and 1 2-bar note. Let's just shorten them a little bit, and we'll take this one in to here. What have we done? We've just created a bit of space. All right, very simple. You can do this. Play around with the length of your bass notes, and look, all that happens here is you'll hear there's a bit of space between the bass notes, and it kind of creates tension and anticipation by not adding anything. Sometimes taking stuff away is all you need. Cool, it works, right? I'm gonna show you one more little trick that you can use on these kind of bass lines, which is approaching the note that's come in with a note that is 2 notes above it, right? So just go 2 notes above, and we'll do the same here. So if I take this note, we look at where we are, hit F, we go up to G. Right, check this out. Perfect, right? Always works. Not much more we can say about it, really. It's not the most exciting kind of thing in the world, but just remember that when you're using these sawtooth basses, you can't jump around too much because it will just sound muddy and terrible. You've got to remember, sustained notes work best with a sawtooth bass. That's why you're going to hear them mainly on a sawtooth bass. Kanye likes to do this technique where you kind of use this sawtooth and you cut the you cut the ends off. And again, experiment with your EQ on this sawtooth as to where you like to set the top end. Look, if I leave it out here, it's not too different. Just be careful about how far you cut it off, because you will start to lose clarity on small speakers. There's a kind of sweet spot there. Again, I always prefer to cut EQ rather than boost, but that's just me. Some people like to boost. Now, if we move to the descending phase of this progression, I'll show you a couple more things we can do with the sawtooth bass line. So here we are. This first one is just an octave technique, which always works again with basses. Any kind of bass you can do this. So all I'm doing is I'm going from this low E, and I found the next E up on the keyboard, and I put that in next to it, and you can always do that. It works. Equal length, but we could have equally gone, you know, half the length of that and this length here. So you know, octaves, easy, anyone can do it, nothing hard there. Already we've taken just those root notes and we can go with an octave up, we can create some space, and we can also approach notes from a note that's a tone away. So you've already got a couple of tricks. So I'm going to give you one that's a little bit more spicy here, and that we have to come to this E minor chord here, where the E minor comes in on bar 30, and we see this note A. You're like, an A, but the chord's E. Yeah, what am I doing? Well, all I'm doing is I'm doing a 5-1, but I'm implying it with my bass. And you can do that even when the chord above it is playing like the E minor. Just because I'm briefly doing it here on this last beat of this bar, right? I'm playing the 5 chord of D, right? So I'm seeing this D here as my like target note, and I go 5th away, it'll be an A. Creates a moment of tension, and everything that I do really is about tension and release, about space. All the call and response things I do and all my little techniques are all just about creating moments where it needs to resolve, and it resolves, and it feels good when you get that payoff, right? And another thing I like to do on sawtooth basses is slide. And if you've ever seen some of these West Coast guys, you're going to hear slides all over the shop like this. Great for bringing in, like, as a marker fill almost, I call it, to bring the bass line in. But again, it might be too much, but as this is a bass line tutorial, I thought I'd show you how to do that anyway. And again, I've got one falling off here at the very end of the passage. Here we go. You can do that, no problem. So again, a couple of cool techniques. You've got 5-1, you've got octaves here, this is another octave here, and I haven't regulated the velocities on this bass here, but you can easily do that if you wanted to, as we'll see in the next technique, which is moving on to 808. Now, the 808 is probably the most common and widely used bass sound, low-end sound in R&B, trap soul, any kind of, again, soulful genres, and something you need some good 808s. I, as a rule of thumb, don't tend to make them myself. I don't think there's much point, although some people like to make them to have full control over them. All I do is I use the Spins 808, which again, look, if it works for Metro and it's been in so many hit records, like, it's good enough for me. Beat Sticks from the future here, just giving you a little tip, extra tip, bonus tip. Now, certain keys work better for low-end bass. You may be thinking, why is my sub just not hitting? Well, from F minor to F sharp minor to G minor, probably the sweet spot where the low end is low enough so that it's going to just rattle those subwoofers, because remember, to get that bass going, you've got to move air, and in those keys and those key ranges, they're not too low so that the sub is just inaudible, just gunk, and they're not too high. Like, actually, C major is good for me to teach you guys, that's why I'm in C major. However, it's not a good key for low end sub bass, so just remember that. So you might want to program in C and then raise it all up. I mean, C major, A minor. So if you're in A minor, you might want to then drop down a couple of keys so that you're, you know, F sharp minor or whatever. If you find it hard to understand what notes are in F sharp minor, you don't even need to know. Hope that helped. Like and subscribe, guys. Hit me up on IG, B6 Production. Copper free mini kit. What are you waiting for if you haven't already? And hit me up for a one-to-one. You get so much value, I promise. Anyway, back to the action. So this is how I've programmed it. And again, if we look at the instrument here, something that I really like to do is maybe add a little glide. Again, if you want that kind of drill sound where that's all done here with the glides. And also, if I wanted that I could grab this E here and pitch it up to like an E here. This will now glide through. Actually, to really get that drill sort of thing, you want to push it up 2 octaves. Not that we're you know, that's how you get that sound, but it's not really what I tend to make. But if you want to know how to do it, that's how you do it. Let's take the glide off there for now. Something else I like to do with my 808s is mess around with the release. Again, sometimes when I put the release all the way in, I really enjoy the way that the 808s sound. They really cut off as soon as the note cuts off, and that can be useful. Before we get into playing techniques, I'll show you again about some more mixing stuff. Again, a quick side chain tutorial. Like, another cool thing about the Spins 808 is you don't necessarily even need kicks. With good 808s, the initial transient is enough, and a lot of tracks don't even bother with kicks when they're using the Spins 808 or the Zay 808. But if you do have a kick, which I put here on the first beat, what I tend to do is just put a compressor on the 808 and set the input to the kick, and then dial your threshold in to how much gain reduction you want. Normally I aim for 4 to 5 dB, and all that does is the bass moves out the way when the kick hits, and we get some space for both. So, you know, you're not eating up as much headroom is what I'm saying. Basically, headroom is key here, because once you eat that up, your track gets quieter, and 808s can eat, and low end can eat up a ton of headroom. Just be careful with them. So yeah, I tend to side chain. Some people don't, but I like to do it. Another cool thing you can do with 808s is copy them like 2 times. You can do it more, but it's just overkill for me. Copy the information down a couple times, and what we're doing here is like a Jason Joshua technique called molting. I spoke about it before, but you would essentially have a sub bass here, sub 808, where again you would use an EQ like this, where I've cut it off to kind of like 80 hertz. So that would just be my super low end, and I'd make sure that it was mono as well. Then I'd have like a mid 808, where I would change my EQ shape to be like just around kind of here, maybe a little higher, you know. And then I'd do my like wide 808 probably on the top, where I'd put maybe a sample delay using the Huss effect, spreading it out a little bit, and then together you'd have like a massive sound. But just be careful about phase issues when you do this kind of thing. And honestly, I don't do it very often. I just use one 808 because I'm lazy, and yeah, it works. Take the EQ off, put the 808 back. Technique wise, I treat these in a similar kind of way to the sawtooth bass. You can use 5 ones, you know, and here's a 5 D, there's an octave trick there. The similar techniques will work with this kind of bass. What am I doing here? I'm just repeating this F at this point in the rhythm. It's just like a syncopation thing where you doom, da doom, da doom, doom. That was the live bass ruin its head. Guys, if you like any of this, hit me up for a 1-to-1. We can go over any of this more in depth. Copper free mini kit, the link is in the description. Got bass midis in there actually, you can study, have a look at. Follow me, like and subscribe and all that good stuff. Let's get into the live bass. And what you heard there was just a little precursor to the main live bass coming in. If you know me, you've seen some of my videos, there's one go-to live bass that I use that a lot of industry producers use. This Scarby Rickenbacker. The reason I like it, I don't always talk about why I like it so much, but it sounds very much like a real bass. 1, 2, it has loads of different presets. You can really change it up and get different tones and sounds out of it. I really like this double date PM. PM just means palm mute, and it's a technique that bass players use, especially when they're playing R&B, soulful genres, where you kind of mute in the strings with your palm. It gets that kind of very round sound. Just sounds good on everything, and also it cuts through on, again, small speakers, because that's translation is a very important thing with low-end instruments. You want to be able to hear everything clearly, and it has a nice top end as well as a good low end as well. There's only a certain range that it lets you play, but you can also use these red keys here to change the articulations, you can do some different ways of playing slides, things like that, that add to the realism. I don't tend to use them that much. I just program, as you know with me, I like to keep things simple. I can be lazy, but the information that I put down is always good, and I'm confident that that's going to achieve the desired result that I have in my head. This bar 40, bringing this live bass in. Bass players and live bass players especially use these kind of fills to, again, create tension in the short space, maybe a bar or two, bar or half a bar before the next section drops every 16 bars. A quick moment of like tension and then a drop kind of thing. Like that's how I see it. And all I'm doing here is rhythmically, you can see that I'm playing notes on da, 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 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and so like you can see in those like eighth notes, or almost like, even depends how you're counting this, but yeah, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and eighth notes is just a subdivision of the bar into smaller units of time. That's all you need to know. And for added realism, you can see that these are all slightly different lengths, and that just, again, a real bass player would not be able to play notes that are exactly the same length, not rigid like that. And you can also pull these notes slightly off the grid. I haven't here, but you can see this note here doesn't land exactly on the bar. Adds to the realism, and also it can help if you've got a kick, give you a little bit of space between when your kick transient hits and then your bass hits as well. So again, good for feeling, but it's also good for like mixing as well, and you know, carving space for different elements in your track. The note choices that I've used here now, I like to think in pentatonic. Obviously this is in C major or A minor. If we talk about it in A minor now, I'm just using notes from that A minor pentatonic scale, which is a 5-note scale, and you've got your root, your A, you've got your flat third, which is a C, then you've got your fourth, which is a D, your fifth, which is a E, and then your flat seventh, which is a G. So those are the 5 notes that are within the pentatonic, A minor pentatonic scale, and that same formula can be used for any minor pentatonic scale across different keys. Just so happens that these are the notes that work in the A minor pentatonic, and you can pull out a million different combinations of notes that will sound good. Use this in conjunction with your, tone away technique we spoke about earlier, or your semitone technique that we also spoke about earlier, create little mini melodies out of like, and playing like minor pentatonic stuff will work over any track in R&B, I can guarantee you. Just don't overdo it. You don't want to just be walking all over the place, but at the end of phrases, or between certain notes, you can get away with short little and then back in. It will always sound good because of the nature of the relationship of the notes to the scale that you're in. I've done a little patterns. Again, I'm creating patterns, so I'm just preempting this E note that comes in on bar 42, and dropping down a note here so you can hear. I'm using that semitone technique, which means that I can go to any note that is a semitone higher or lower than my note that I'm currently on, so that if I can create a bit of tension briefly using that E, but it's within this like 3-note motif, and then we're into that E here. What's going on here? This D is my target note, and I'm using a note that is a minor third away. Take your D, you can move up 1, 2, 3 semitones, and you'll be a minor third away. 4 semitones will be a major third away, so that will work in pretty much every instance. Bringing it down nicely there. Another fill here. Just using the G, the C, the A, and the G again. Again, pentatonic fill, right? Remember that all these notes here are within the A minor pentatonic, and I've just created this little fill out of using the A minor pentatonic. Just works great there. Then we've got what's that? Well, our root chord is the E minor. Going up to the A, using notes again from the minor pentatonic, right? to create a little bit of movement. Then I'm using another rhythmic variation here on the same note, just and then of course this note, this E, is preempting us going back to the beginning of the cycle again, the F. So you can see that just in there's a lot to be learned and a lot to unpack. If you want this MIDI file and you want to study it, hit me up on IG and I'll send it over to you. But you know, there's so many possibilities you can do with live bass, and just scratching the surface. Use rhythmic movement, use minor pentatonics, use space, push your bass slightly off grid, change your velocities up a little bit, experiment with approaching notes from a fifth away, from a minor third away, from a tone away, and even a semitone away. You can create nice little runs, and really they are the building blocks to better bass lines. So if you've enjoyed this, hit like and subscribe. Check out video in the top corner for some more source. Peace.